So I wanted to mention something towards the end of class about looks like an assignment that I posted. It's just about kind of the tournament. So I put an announcement up that, you guys can submit your brackets to that, since it's, it's kind of related to this class. And basically, if anybody's bracket beats mine, I'll kind of do just a small curve on everyone's homework assignment. So that gives everyone an incentive. The more of you that submit a bracket, even if you know nothing about college basketball, the higher the chances are that somebody, that at least one of you beats me, right? And I'm not that great, so it's not going to take that much, as long as you guys kind of submit something up there. I'll keep I guess also the incentive is maybe some bragging rights. So I'll kind of grade these, or grade them, score them, and then kind of keep putting an Excel file up on, well, I don't know, maybe not everyone wants to know how bad they're doing, but I'll kind of be keeping track and then kind of showing who's doing the best kind of week to week. So at the end of every kind of weekend, I'll kind of calculate the scores and let you guys know where that's at and how bad you guys are beating me. But I'll also kind of maybe look at some tournament stuff at the end of class today. Today's class might be a little bit different. I think I'm just going to kind of do some things that I want to do that maybe I wouldn't traditionally. So, but we'll start out kind of picking up where we left off, because we're trying to build up, and I think we did skill acquisition, trying to build up more knowledge about labor markets and how they work in sport, as well as just more generally. So let me go here. So we left off talking about like the skill acquisition. We were thinking about the differences in the demand curve for labor really being influenced by two things: the marginal revenue per win, and then kind of the marginal number of wins that labor is bringing, or their marginal product. So we already discussed this a little bit when it comes to kind of wages. We did talk about kind of optimal effort levels, so I'm not going to revisit this, but this is just kind of, something we've already talked about that relates to the wages we might see, especially in individual sports, right? And we talked about we can determine optimal effort levels based off of what the prize money in that tournament might be. Really just shifts that marginal revenue curve up and down. So it's something that we've already kind of thought about. We also had this set up as a normal form game. Thinking about, the incentives maybe to use steroids versus not. So I'm going to kind of throw another wrinkle into that, okay? So what if everything's not a guarantee, right? So if we think about kind of using PEDs, right, to obtain higher wages or potentially increase performance, which we believe would then influence wages down the road, we might have to start thinking about expected value. So expected values, this is really just the idea of every outcome that I could see, I'm going to multiply that by the probability that I see that outcome and then add them all up. Right? So what we're thinking about here, I'm going to switch to the dot cam real quick. Just say real quick, it takes a little bit, huh? Okay, so the basic idea of expected value is something like this, right? So let's say the probability that, I'm investing in something, right? And the probability that it's has a return of, so we'll think about, here's our probabilities. So maybe there's a 20% chance that I see a 5% return on my investment. There's an 80% chance that I see, 1%, right? So I don't want to just simply find, if I'm trying to think about, well, what's the expected value or the expected return on this investment? Well, I can't just simply take the average of these two returns, because one of them is way more likely to occur. So what I do is I take the probability that this outcome occurs, multiply that by the value of that outcome. Here it's 1%. Then the probability of the other outcome multiplied by the probability, multiplied by the actual value of whatever that outcome is, right? So here, I don't know let's think. This is going to be 1 plus 0.8. So kind of the expected return here I would have is 1.8%. We can do the same thing, but with maybe these PEDs. So if I remember right, and I'll pop this up here. So we've got, if a player has a 60% chance of being a home run leader, if they're not using PEDs in a PED-free league, but a 90% chance if they take PEDs. However, there's a 40% chance they get caught. Okay? So the way that we're going to start thinking about this is basically, I've simplified this one down to not being, oh, I'll get paid this much if I use PEDs and I don't get caught versus this. I've simplified this down to thinking about the expected value of simply being the home run leader. So, if I am the home run leader, this is a good thing. I'll just think of this as a 1. And if I'm not, I'll think about that as a 0. Okay, so if they don't use PEDs, this is kind of easy because, well, the probability that they are a home run leader was said, what, is 60%, so 0.6 times 1, right? It's just a 1 if they are the home run leader, 0 if not, and then plus 0.4 times 0 here. But it kind of simplifies it because anything times 0 is 0. So the expected value, well, that's just the probability that I am the home run leader, right? So that one's kind of easy, right? But if they're using PEDs, right, we can think about there's a 90% chance that they are the home run leader, right? So 90% times 1. However, there's a 40% chance they get caught, right? So I only see this outcome. I'm only the home run leader if I don't get caught, right? So the probability I get caught is 40% or 0.4. The probability that I don't get caught is 0.6 there. Right? And then, we think about the probability I'm not the home run leader, 0.1 times 0. So that doesn't really influence much. Or the other scenario would be, we kind of now can think about, there's almost like 3 outcomes, is that I am the home run leader, right? So 0.9 times 1, but I get caught, and the probability I get caught is 0.4. Okay? So, we can think about there's a lot of expected values kind of behind the scenes here, but if we're boiling this down to kind of just a 1-0 outcome, I either am the home run leader or I'm not, really, this simplifies to when I'm not using PEDs, it would just be 0.6 times 1. Oh, sorry. Oh, gotcha. Thank you. So just 0.6 times 1. And this one would boil down to, I put a 1 in here, didn't I? This shouldn't be a 1. I was explaining this. So there's a 90% chance, or probably a 0.9, I am the home run leader. However, there's a 40% chance I get caught. If I get caught, essentially they strip that title from me, so that should be a 0. Sorry about that. So then really the only thing left down here, right, would be this component, because anything times 0 is just 0. So we can think about these different expected values are going to be based off of not only like the percent chance that I win this award, or am paid this amount, but also we can incorporate this probability that they get caught. Okay? So, really just boils down to 0.6 times 0.9, which is 0.54 or 54%. Okay? And, really, if I don't take the PEDs, the underlying probability was just 0.6. So what am I going to choose to do? Well, the highest payoff there is not using PEDs, right? As opposed to using them, because the expected value there would only be 54%, or a probability of 0.54. So how could it become more likely that we see people use PEDs in this scenario? So the current probability of getting caught is 0.4. Right? What happens if that probability drops to something like 0.2? Well, if the probability that I get caught is 0.2, well, now the probability that I don't get caught is 0.8, and that's going to increase the expected value from, if we remember, kind of using PEDs here. And I don't know what the cutoff point is, but there's going to be some point at which, if the probability that I get caught falls low enough, then the expected value from using PEDs is greater than that of not using, right? Or I shouldn't say do not use. I should say they are not using. Okay. Any questions there? Just got the engine. I'm just kind of want to introduce the idea of, because we'll look at it in a couple other situations where we're thinking about expected values, right? There's likelihoods of, or there's probabilities that certain things are going to occur. Okay with that? Okay. And I had in-class example there. That was just some of the work that I had just done. We also want to review kind of monopsonies here. So this was from before the midterm, but just kind of a quick review of what we were doing, right? So we said, if we're looking at the labor market, so the quantity of labor, geez, is that my computer? My goodness, hold on. Let me make sure, okay. Yep, something's going on. Give me 1 second. Let me try to just. So if one of you want to ask a live question, type it in the chat here until I, let me see, what would have been open? I can exit out of that. That should be the only thing that's making noise. We'll turn this down just in case. All right, that's a little bit nicer. Okay, so we've got this quantity of labor, and we've got our wages on the y-axis. Right? So the setup was we've got some supply curve for labor, some demand curve, which we now know that demand curve for labor, that was just the value of the marginal product of labor or the value of the additional wins the player was adding in, which we had was the marginal revenue per win times the number of additional wins that player brought in. So with monopsony power, right, what we said was we have a twice as steep marginal expenditure curve. Similar to when we have monopoly power, it's a twice as steep marginal revenue curve that they're making their decisions based off of. So they choose the quantity wherever that marginal expenditure hits the demand curve. Okay? So wherever the marginal expenditure hits the demand curve, so basically the additional expenditure is equal to the additional value of adding that last unit of labor. So this will be kind of my optimal quantity of labor. I then go plug this in to my supply curve and find the point that I'm at on my supply curve, which would reflect kind of what the marginal cost is. So with monopsony power, I say, okay, look, I know that the marginal cost of supplying the amount of labor is this value. So the player would play for anything equal to or greater than this wage, right? So we kind of think about that's going to be our monopsony wage. So relative, right, that's our monopsony wage, but if we didn't have monopsony, it would just be where supply is equal to demand. So we can kind of see that with a monopsony, the wages are going to be lower than what they were without it. Okay? And this, the idea of the reserve clause was that, you know, if I have the rights to the player and they can't sign with any other team, there's no competition, and I have monopsony power in that market. Okay? Just kind of a reminder of what that looked like. So we know that we have monopsony power potentially existing. You know, even without the reserve clause, you can think of, and I think we'll get a little bit more in depth into this today, but there are things like restricted free agents, which means you're not completely a free agent. There's some restrictions, is that potentially the team still has some monopsony power over kind of making a deal with you, right? Or signing a contract, or kind of what the wages they pay you are. Right? So if there is some type of restricted free agency that works similar to the reserve clause and gives any monopsony power to teams, we know that we're going to expect that players are paid lower wages than if there wasn't that monopsony power. Okay. All right, so how can we combat that, right? One way I think I briefly touched on this is unions, right? Because what do unions do? Well, they give the players not monopsony power, but the players are supplying the labor. So if they're able to form a union, they can gain some monopoly power in the labor market. Okay? So if they gain monopoly power in the labor market, right, they can act as one of two types of unions. Okay, so there's craft and there's industrial. Craft unions are only going to accept a certain number of members, which essentially is going to create, or which is essentially going to cause our supply curve to go vertical at whatever the membership number is. And it increases wages. I'll show you how this all kind of plays out. And then the industrial union is going to be more like what we think of traditionally as unions operating, where they have now monopoly power in that market, and so they're going to be able to set higher wages. However, in both scenarios, we may see the number of workers, right? We're thinking about unionizing. We're now thinking about every player is kind of having, we're thinking about the entire labor market, not just that of one individual player. We may end up seeing with these unions, there are a smaller number of workers potentially in the league. Okay? So how do each of these work, and how do they differ? Okay? So I said revisit unions, but I'm just going to start out with it. Well, no, you know what? I'm going to try to use something a little bit different here. We'll do it with some formulas in a second, but I want to kind of relate this to what we're talking about with monopsony power. So we might end up with a couple different things going on in this graph, but I'll try to kind of use some different colors, and I'll try to be very specific about what I'm doing. So let's say we not only have monopsony power here, but we also have monopoly power if the players are able to unionize. So the way that that industrial union works is they essentially act as though they're a monopolist. So they're going to be making a decision. And I'm going to get this across at the same point just to make this a little easier. They're going to be making decisions based off of a twice as steep marginal revenue curve. Okay? Well, they choose the quantity where marginal revenue is equal to that supply curve or marginal cost. However, they don't, the player union doesn't want a low wage. They know that if I can force quantity to be down here, the wage that the teams are willing to pay, right, would be at the point they're at on their demand curve, because the demand reflects marginal benefit. And in the context of the labor market, what is the marginal benefit? It's the value of the additional wins that players bring in. So we know that they'd be willing to pay up to this amount. So if we just had a monopoly, so here we can go, I'm going to run out of room, but if you're writing this down, a monopoly wage there. We know that they would set the wage higher than the equilibrium point with, if we didn't have any type of monopoly or monopsony power. But now if we have both of these going on, reminder, this was kind of the wage that the monopsony would like to pay. Well, now we have a problem, right? The monopoly wants a higher wage than what the monopsony, right? So we know that they're going to have to do some bargaining, and that really any wage in between this range is going to be okay with either of them, right? In the sense that any wage here, I'd be willing to work for, because the marginal cost is much lower than any of these wages. So for the players, the marginal, the wage, the benefit they're getting is going to be greater than the additional cost. And we know that for teams, they're okay with any wage in this range because they would have been willing to pay up to this amount. This is how much the player brought in from their additional wins. And so really, if I'm paying a wage anything below that, well, my benefits would be greater than my costs. So any wage in that range is really, good for either side, or either side would be willing to accept that wage. But where do we arrive at? So that's something we'll kind of hold off and talk about later, but it's going to be through kind of this process of bargaining, right? Or potentially, where potentially we could see maybe strikes or lockouts or something. So, but we know that ultimately we're going to arrive somewhere in that range. So when we have both monopoly and monopsony power, we can't necessarily say what the wage is going to be, but we can put kind of bounds on it, right? We know that's going to be in between these two values. Okay? So this is without any formulas, right? This is just kind of the general idea. What we're now going to do is revisit it now with formulas, right? So I'm just going to work through a union example, and we can see how this looks like with some actual values. Right? So we've got a demand curve for labor and a supply curve for labor here. Right? So we could determine what the equilibrium is going to be. How would we do that? Here I'm going to leave it up here as I draw it out first, and I'll zoom in on this in a second. I just want to make sure that I'm getting all these numbers correct. So we've got quantity of labor, our wage. Supply starts out at what? I'm going to write K for thousands here too. So 10K and goes up. Our supply. Our demand equation starts at 60,000 and then is downward sloping. Okay. So how can I find what this equilibrium quantity and wage is, right? Well, all I'm going to do is set these two equations equal to each other, right? Because it's the point at which they're the same value. It's the quantity at which the supply and demand curve are at the same point, right? The same wage, same value there. So, oh, sorry about that. What I'm going to do is take that demand equation, so 60,000, and I already forgot what it was. The other one was just plus Q. Is it 4Q? Yeah, 4Q. Okay. So minus 4Q, set that equal to supply. So we had set our supply equal to our demand. Okay. From here, it's just a little bit of algebra. So I can move the 10,000 over by subtracting it. So I get what? 50,000. Add 4Q to both sides. Divide both sides by 5. And I would end up with a quantity of what? 10,000. Yeah. So I found this equilibrium quantity, which was 10,000. Okay. Now, how do I find the wage? Well, I can do it one of two ways, right? I'm looking for the point that's on either the supply or demand curve here at that quantity of 10,000. So I just go back and I plug either 10,000 into my demand or my supply equation. Probably the easier one here, 10,000 plus Q, so 10,000 plus 10,000, right? That equilibrium quantity. Okay. So my wage, right, was just from plugging that value of 10,000 into that quantity, and I get a wage of 20,000 there, okay? So it's just like you would a regular supply and demand, kind of solve for the equilibrium. It's just in the context of a labor market, right? We're talking about wages, okay? So that's where we started out, right? That's our equilibrium without any power, right? So what if we have a craft union instead of an industrial union? So I showed you the general setup of an industrial union. Actually, we'll skip this one. We'll do the, we'll kind of do the industrial union first, since that's the example we just worked through, so we can relate something to that. So how can I find the wage and the number of workers that an industrial union would lead to? Okay. Well, we know that if they're an industrial union, they're going to be facing this twice as steep marginal revenue curve. So we can think about this as the marginal revenue that the union is going to make decisions based off of. The optimal number of kind of workers here is going to be where that marginal revenue curve hits that marginal cost, or the supply curve for labor. So how can I find that point? Well, get this paper to move. There we go. If we look at our original demand equation, marginal revenue is going to start at the same point as demand, but be twice as steep. So instead of negative 4Q, it would be, right, 2 times 4, so negative 8Q. Well, now all I'm doing is setting my marginal revenue curve equal to supply, right? So now I'll set my marginal revenue equal to my marginal cost, which is my supply curve. Right? So I've got 60,000 minus 8Q is equal to 10,000 plus Q. Right? And so now it's just a little bit of algebra, just like we did before, to solve for what Q is. So I'm not going to kind of work through all the steps of the algebra. Hopefully we're okay with that. If you're having any troubles with that and these examples trying to reproduce the answers, reach out to me, let me know, and kind of can help you kind of work some of those kinks out. But if we do this, ultimately we'll get a quantity of, I think it's, see if I can remember the value. I think it's 5,500. 55. I think it ends up being 5,555. Should be what, 50,000 divided by 9. So that's our equilibrium quantity. How do I find the wage that union would be able to demand from kind of the teams? Well, the teams would pay up to whatever the value of that worker's additional wins was. Well, that's the point we're at in the demand curve. So to find the wage here, I would take that quantity of 5,555 and just plug it in. Oh, hold on. And just plug it in to my demand curve equation. Right? So 60,000, so my wage would be 60,000 minus 4 times that 5,555, which was the equilibrium quantity for the monopoly or the industrial union, okay? If I do that, it's gonna be what, like 57 something or 47 something? 37,777, right? So if we compute this, we get 37,777, which is our wage right here. Okay. Any questions on that up to this point? Okay with this? And yeah, I'll actually address the midterm towards the end of class as well, and the scores and things. So if we're okay with this, what if instead I had a craft union? So what a craft union does is it just chooses the quantity that it wants. It doesn't do it based off of this marginal revenue, marginal cost. Now, they're probably trying to do that, right? But maybe let's say they guess a little bit wrong and they want to limit it to only 5,000 players, okay? So what would the difference be if we had instead a craft union? So we'd have the same kind of setup. Supply starts at 10,000. Demand started at 60. Okay. What a craft union does is, okay, look, we want to set our memberships to, that should be a vertical line also. It's a little bit upward sloping. This should just be completely vertical. So you can ignore that. Well, it has the same sort of effect because it's limited the number of players. And if they have this power now as a craft union, they know that at that quantity of labor, that teams would be willing to pay up to that point in the demand curve. So now it's as simple as, okay, we'll just take that demand curve equation and plug in whatever the quantity we set our membership to, right? So plug in that 5,000, 60 minus 4 times 5,000 should just be, I think, 40,000 here. Right? So it kind of has the same outcomes in the sense that we can limit the number of players to raise wages, which is really the same thing we were doing when we were acting as a kind of an industrial union, working to figure out what wage we wanted to charge, because that wage would have then resulted in kind of a lower quantity of workers as well. Now, I chose a different quantity here. Instead of 5,555, I chose 5,000. But if the craft union had chosen 5,555, what would have been different? Nothing, right? Because remember, what did we do once we found this equilibrium quantity? We just plugged it, where was it at? Yeah, here. We just plugged it into the demand equation to get that wage. So if we chose a quantity of 5,555, what did we do in this situation? Well, we just plugged it into the demand equation. So we could get to the same point acting in two different ways, either limiting our membership or based off the information we have, kind of choosing a wage, that we come to the league. And, more likely than not, this isn't going to affect kind of your superstar players. What we're thinking about here is probably this is the overall labor market for kind of the lower end players where you're setting like a league minimum where you want to kind of have a union so that the individuals on the lower end of the distribution, we make sure we can kind of raise their wages. Okay. And I'll go back to this since this was the last one that we worked on. Any questions over any of that? Okay with that? So we've got craft and industrial unions. We'll kind of work through some examples with some equations. And, we could do things, I kind of failed to mention this, we could calculate deadweight loss. This is going to be, a little bit more work, but really, let's say I wanted to find the deadweight loss here. Right? Well, if I'd already had done that previous work, I think we had this was without any power. We had the equilibrium quantity was 10,000 and the equilibrium wage was 20K. Well, I'm close here to being able to find out the deadweight loss, right? This kind of red shaded area. How would I do that? Well, I've got a triangle and I've got the kind of base, and now all I need is the height. I just have to find what this value is. Right? How can I find that value? Well, that's just the point that I'm at on my supply curve at a quantity of 5,000. So it's as easy as taking that supply curve equation, and plug in that quantity that we're at of 5,000. So what, 15,000? Okay. So now it's just the height of that triangle, which is what, 40. I'm not going to include all the zeros, otherwise I'm definitely going to, I'm going to run out of room either way. So, see if we can get this up here. I think I'm zoomed out as much as I can be. Oh, that helps a little bit. All right, so we're looking for that deadweight loss. We're going to take 40,000 minus 15,000, right? That gives us our height. The base is going to be the difference between these two. So 10,000 minus 5,000. And then it's a triangle, so multiply by 1/2, right? So it's really just one additional step that we had to do there in order to be able to calculate deadweight loss. And we could do a very similar thing just with a different quantity if they were acting here as that industrial union, right? We would have 1, 2, 3 of all the points we need. We just have to find out what point are we at on the supply curve at a quantity of 55, 55. Any questions over that before we keep moving here? Okay, so we'll begin talking about free agency here. We've got two types of free agency in the NFL, restricted and unrestricted. But more generally, it goes all the way back to 1957, I guess, where there was a court case, where owners weren't signing free agents. So even though they had free agency, there was kind of this collusion by owners that said, okay, we realize that they are a free agent, but we won't try to sign a deal with any of your players if you don't try to sign a deal with any of our players that are free agents. And so got taken to court, and eventually kind of, they say, you can't do that. That's collusion. And so it comes out, in 1960, that they have this rule, right, which is that the club of the free agent you signed could be awarded players. So if you broke this rule, which was you can't deal with these free agents from these other teams. If you actually did sign one of those free agents, you would have to give that team that you kind of took quote unquote that player from some player to kind of compensate them for that. So basically, it turned into a trade, right? Because now if I sign that free agent, I'm going to have to give up a player to that team that free agent was previously on. Right? So this is kind of, similar to the reserve clause in that, well, if I want that player, they can't just go sign with another team. It's going to require that team actually gives up a player and makes a trade for them. So this rule wasn't overturned until 1992. So, the invariance principle is going on here the entire time, where it doesn't really matter in the sense that the teams that value the player the most are going to be the ones that end up with that player. But it does matter in the sense that, well, this means that players are likely not going to be getting the resources, right? Because they don't have kind of the rights to sign them or with the original team they were on. And so wages were kind of lowered as a result, right? So the teams were being compensated, but the players weren't. I don't really remember all the details here, so let's look at here. Basically, if we think about kind of like the NHL and the NBA, it almost happened organically in that we always had free agency because there was always a competing league that was good enough, could pay high enough wages, had a high enough demand curve for their league, that there was always competition, right? Even if I'm on a team currently and they have the rights to me, I can always go sign with this other league, right? And then they don't recognize kind of the opposing league's kind of contract. So we kind of had that kind of rise up organically in those two leagues, or free agency rose up organically. And eventually in the NBA, not only so once they merged, right? So now there's not the outside option. Well, then what happened to free agency? Well, basically they were kind of, the NBA was worried that the players were going to unionize. And so to prevent that from happening, they just decided to kind of allow free agency, right? So they allowed free agency, which did increase wages some, out of a fear that the players would unionize and then increase wages, even higher, right? Which ultimately, right, they now are unionized, so it only worked for a short period of time. We kind of talked a little bit about free agency in the MLB before. They had that reserve clause, and eventually it was lifted in 1976. Okay? So that's just, some history. I don't want to waste a lot of time on that. We've talked a little bit about the MLB free agency history. The other ones, wanted to mention that it happens organically, but we still have different types of free agency in which monopsony power could exist or not exist. So with an unrestricted free agent, this is someone who's allowed to kind of go out and sign a deal with whatever team is willing to, pay them the most or give them the most attractive offer. So there we would have no monopsony power, right? We have several buyers, right? Several consumers of that player's labor. With restricted free agency, I'll skip over, or I'll hold off. I forgot I had a slide on the exact kind of things. But basically, unrestricted free agency occurs kind of after your first 6 years in the league in the MLB. NBA is after 4 years, but only for kind of first-round draft picks do they have to wait that long. NFL is 4 years or after the rookie contract has been expired. And then the NHL, as with most things, has a few more kind of rules to your unrestricted free agency. It's a little bit more complex, right? But they all have some form of it, right? And I don't remember exactly. Oh, so it's like set by age and years of experience in the NHL. So kind of whichever is greater, whichever would be kind of less. So unrestricted free agency isn't that interesting, right? Because once I'm an unrestricted free agent, all right, like I can sign with any team. There's no monopsony power. We don't have much to really consider. But with the restricted free agent, the original team has a right to kind of refuse you signing with another team, right? So you still can go out and try to sign deals with other teams, but the current team that you were on, they have a right of refusal. Right? They can say, no, we don't want you to sign with that team. Now, that seems unfair, and it is. So they said, well, you're a restricted free agent, they can reject that you signing with that team only if they match that team's offer or pay you more, right? So it still is free agency in the sense that you can go out and there can be competition that would drive your wages up, but it's not unrestricted because you still might end up in the same location, right? Your freedom of choosing which team you want to be on really doesn't factor the player's utility in at all. It's just looking at the dollars, right? Because if another team was, let's say I'm a free agent and they go out and they find a team that's willing to pay them $20 million, right? Well, but the current team they're on says, okay, we'll give you 21 million. We refuse that, right? We want to keep you, so we'll pay you 21. We match it or pay you more. So now you can't leave and sign with our team. You have to sign with us, right? Well, the issue is that assumes that the player only cares about their salary, right? Maybe the team that was going to pay him 20 million was a much higher quality team, right? So they thought their chances of winning, might be higher, or maybe getting a Super Bowl or World Series, whatever the sport was. So it takes away some of the freedom from the player, in which his utility may not be solely driven through income. It may be driven by other things, but as long as their current team can match that player can't leave. Right? So each league has different rules. MLB doesn't have this restricted free agency. The NBA keeps it for first-round picks. NFL is kind of after the rookie contract a certain number of years. And once again, as always, the NHL has some more complex rules. It depends on the position you play and some other factors. But you'll kind of notice, why might I want restricted free agency, right? So what's the value of restricted free agency to the league? Yeah, right. It makes it, notice, first round picks only. They don't care if you're kind of, maybe, one of the bench players. But also, we know that kind of for these rookies, if they are of high quality, very quickly these small market teams maybe who are performing poorly aren't going to be able to keep them, right? And so the goal is to try to keep those higher quality players on those kind of lower quality teams that are drafting them early in their career. Okay. So, we're at time. Do I want to dive into all this today? So I think I want to show, I think we'll kind of leave the slides for a second. I have up on, I closed out the thing. So on Canvas, under the Files tab, there should be, where was it? Here it is. There should be an Excel file called Class Basketball Regressions. Okay? So I just want to show you a couple things in this so that we start to kind of work in some Excel stuff a little bit more kind of week to week. Okay? So this is Class Basketball Regressions. It's got a bunch of different information. So this is like, have some tournament stuff. So like, I think we'll do this one since it's really relevant right now. So I have like different years, and I don't have the school names on here. I think I stripped the names on this, but basically all these are a bunch of different teams in different years, and they have number of undergraduates, so the total number of undergraduates. We have things like the team revenue. We have things like, did they previously make it into the tournament? Previous undergraduate enrollment. So these are just kind of some lagged stuff. And then any round is kind of whether or not they made it into the NCAA tournament, right? Or did they appear in any round of the NCAA tournament? So it's a 0 if they didn't, and then a 1 when they did. Okay? So I don't know, if we had a data set like this, we could start to think about things like how much does making that NCAA tournament, right? How much does it maybe, how much does it boost the team's revenue the following year, right? So what we're thinking about there, where's my, it's down here, there we go. So we're thinking about how does kind of making the NCAA tournament, maybe how does it maybe dries up the demand curve for that team. So more people go out to watch them the following year. They buy more of their apparel. So maybe we're thinking about revenue might be impacted by, did I previously kind of make the tournament? Which in the data was that variable just, were they in any round of the tournament, right? That means they made it into the tournament. So just kind of a review of how we would do this in Excel. We go to File, down to Options here, Add-ins. Hopefully if we've done this once, though, we don't have to continue to do this. I go to Manage My Add-ins. I make sure the Analysis Tool Pack is selected. Okay. Once that's selected, I can go to my Data tab. Should be showing up here. Now I hit that and I can't. Oh no, what did I do? Here, I can't do this. All right, so we got our Data tab. Why is my data analysis not showing up? Here, let's try that again. So File, Options, did I accidentally select off of it? Add-ins, go. We got the Analysis Tool Pack. Here, let's make sure we get that. Why is this not showing me my data analysis? Oh, I'm in the wrong file, the wrong thing. So the data, well, maybe we can troubleshoot this together. Add-ins, so I've got the Analysis Tool Pack. Why is it not showing up? Well, maybe we won't do this today. Let's customize the rhythm. Let's see. I feel like didn't throw in our data tools. Yeah, I guess we might not be doing it today. I guess I'll have to figure out why this isn't popping up. Well, what that should do is give you an option for data analysis right here on the right. I think this has something to do with accidentally getting signed into my OneDrive. I had this happen once before. Let's try doing one more thing. So, does it say tool pack anywhere? Let's try resetting it. Now let's see to make sure that the all right, well, I guess I'll work on that for next class so I can make sure we can do some Excel stuff. So we'll exit out of this instead. I guess we'll, maybe I'm feeling nice today. Maybe we'll end a little bit early. I did want to talk about a few more things before we get out of here. So I'll make sure I have Excel working for next Thursday's class, because Tuesday is one of those study days. So we won't meet Tuesday. I won't be putting up any kind of videos or anything. We won't have class until next Thursday. And like I said, you can upload your kind of tournament to Canvas underneath. This is like 2021 NCAA tournament. I will also get up the next homework assignment, which we haven't worked through everything for, but you can at least start working on some of the early problems. So I'll get that posted either this evening or early in the day tomorrow. And I think that should cover it in terms of housekeeping stuff. So we'll meet back on Thursday. I'll be using that study day to kind of get a bunch of the data sets that I have left to send out to all of you guys. I'll start grading that second homework this evening as well. I graded the exams. So overall, the exams were pretty good. I don't have them factored into the grades in Canvas yet. I just have to update the weighting. So I'll go in when I get done with class today, and I'll make it so that the exam is now influencing the grade you see on Canvas. Currently, it's set at 0% because I didn't want to have it set as I was grading them, and some people have, and some people have been treating it as like a 0. And so now that I have them all graded, I'll go through and I'll kind of use the weight outline in the syllabus on Canvas so you can kind of see where you're at, factoring in that exam grade. I think the average, the mean was like a high, so I think it was a 78 or a 77, but the median was a little bit higher, so it was like an 83 or something. So that mean might have been influenced by 1 or 2 zeros that were in there. So overall, pretty good. And from me going through them and grading them, I think overall I was pretty happy with the short answer portions. I would say for the final and also for homeworks, once again, just read carefully. A lot of points were missed, mainly because people, didn't answer the question. If the question asks you, did profits go up, or what happened to profits, total revenue, and make sure you explicitly say what happens to those things. Now, it's pretty lenient on some of them where it's like if you indicate on a graph, I get what you're trying to do here, but for some of them, like there was no work shown, or kind of you just kind of forgot to explicitly say you answered part of the question, not the entire question, right? But overall, they're pretty good. I was pretty happy with them. So I'm not going to curve them because the kind of average is where I like to see it. But yeah, hopefully kind of keep that up and the finals look similar. I think I'll be pretty happy with where we end up. So any questions for me? I know someone had a question earlier, and I think it might have been about the weighting of the exam. Yeah, so it'll be reflected in your exam when I get back to my office. I'll kind of change the weights. I finished grading the last one before I started teaching earlier today, so I haven't had a chance to go in and kind of get that Canvas grade updated. Okay. Also, I'll post an answer key to that, so if you are going back and looking at it, you can kind of figure out like exactly what you should have done if you got some points wrong. Okay. All right, kind of a quick class today, I guess, but I'll try to figure out why my Excel data analysis isn't working, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about Excel next Thursday, so that you can start to think about some of the data portion of your project, okay? All right, we'll see you guys next Thursday, okay?